It's spring and you want to hike, bike, hit up the farmer's market, but the last thing you want to do on a warm, sunny morning is clean house. That's where Greenland Pro Cleaning comes in. They're eco-friendly, allergy-friendly, and locally owned in Asheville. Listeners of The Overlook get a free upholstery and refrigerator cleaning upgrade with their first booking. Just use the code PODCAST at checkout. Make the most of your time this spring and visit greenlandprocleaning.com/overlook.
I am a maker, a builder, a baker, although sometimes my messes are all that you'll find. I'll tell a story, both true and allegory. Oh, the process is precious, so it takes up all my time.
I don't want to assume too much here, but I'm guessing you, the listener, learned how to read when you were young, and it's a skill you simply haven't had to think about. But for thousands of youth and adults throughout Buncombe County, literacy is a hurdle impacting nearly every element of life.
People find us for so many different reasons. Sometimes our students want to be able to find a better paying job. Sometimes they want to be able to support their kids in school. And then sometimes they want to feel more connected to the community.
This is The Overlook with Matt Peiken, a podcast about the news, arts, issues, and trends of Asheville, North Carolina. My guests are Executive Director Amanda Rubleski and Program Directors Rebecca Massey and Aaron Sebelius with Literacy Together. It's an Asheville nonprofit training and teaming reading tutors with struggling youth, immigrants, people emerging from prison, and many other walks of life. We talk about how literacy is often an issue of equity, how myriad life challenges can hold people back from literacy, how someone can graduate high school and still not be able to read well, and how tutoring is really only half the work of Literacy Together's directors. Literacy Together isn't the only local nonprofit focusing on literacy in Asheville and Buncombe County. Last October, I featured the leaders of Read to Succeed. I began today's conversation by asking how Literacy Together distinguishes itself in this region. Amanda Rubleski is first to speak.
Our mission is to transform lives and communities through the power of literacy. And we believe in a just and equitable community where literacy can be achieved and accessed by everyone. And we do that by finding volunteer tutors who can work with students to help them meet their literacy goals. And you're right, the need in Buncombe County is huge. About 15% of the Buncombe County population is classified as low literate, which means that they have a difficult time understanding complex words and vocabulary. And so our work in partnering with other organizations, partnering with our community college system, is to really give that extra boost and that extra attention to help our students achieve their goals.
You said a couple of things that just point to something stark here. So 15%, can you give us some context? Is there a norm? What is the general range of percentage for literacy or lack thereof in a community? Here it's 15%. Is that high compared to other areas our size or larger?
I'm less familiar with the national statistics. We're doing better in Buncombe County than we are throughout the state. So that's actually more positive number than the state of North Carolina. But it's pretty similar to the national average.
What contributes, what are some of the factors that lead people well into adulthood having struggles with literacy?
People fall between the cracks. People have all kinds of different needs, different learning styles, and it can be challenging for people to get that kind of extra support and attention that they need. And literacy really impacts every area of our lives. If a mother is not able to read, that means she's not able to read to her child. And so we see that cycle continuing through generations, and it's a cycle that we're trying to break, and that we work with other organizations to try to do that.
What are some of the root causes? Is it ranging everything from some disabilities to equity issues, poverty, all of the above? What contributes to somebody who, you would think they've gone through school? Some people, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, there are people who get high school diplomas who struggle with literacy, which to me speaks to an issue there, that how are people graduating if they're not really able to read? Run down some of the causes of this, and from there, is it just simply a matter of tutoring?
There's a student in one of our programs, adult literacy, who actually graduated from one of our local schools many years ago, and with us now because he struggles with literacy.
More than one.
Can you speak to that a little bit, Rebecca? Give us an example, without naming names, of the adults who come into your program and what challenges they've had and how your program intercepts those challenges.
It's a really big picture, a really big problem. But I would say with the broadest strokes, there are two major factors. Everything goes back to equity. But the country is not set up to take care of the needs of poor people. Most of the people in our program, probably all of them, live below the poverty level, and most of them are the working poor. That's one thing. And then all of our major institutions, healthcare, justice system, education, finances, housing, are affected by white supremacy culture. And our black students in particular are also disadvantaged because of those systems. Both of those forces together have led people in our program to not get the resources that they need. And then each individual story is different from there. But those are the two biggest fights that we have, I would say.
Can we drill into this a little more in terms of the racial inequity that happens? How does that play out in real time? Because you have black students, white students in the same school, ostensibly going through the same educational programs, having the same teachers. How does the racial inequity play out when on the surface of things, they're in the same school? What happens?
A lot of times they're not in the same school. Schools get to be pretty segregated. But I will say, just based on the stories of the students that I've talked to, a lot of black students, and particularly black males, will have gone through school without the resources that they need. And then if they are frustrated, their frustration and not getting the help that they need is perceived as aggression. And so with that starts these disciplinary actions and resentments and things like that. And so a lot of the students that we have that can't read, that are black males, were subject to discipline or just got frustrated and left.
Does it also come down to that the resources that you mentioned, they're not always at the same school? Some schools are very under-resourced compared to others. Yeah. Does that play out? Some might have very well-stocked libraries in their school.
Yeah, definitely the funding for schools is inequitable. We'll do the racial part first and then the financial part in a minute. But going back to the race issue, the stories of the white students who came to learn how to read or to build up their literacy who did graduate high school they had maybe a different temperament or they were perceived differently. So they had the same issues that our black students had, but when they got frustrated, they weren't misperceived as being aggressive, and their teachers perceived them differently, so they got pushed on, which of course is no favor to them if they graduate high school and can't read. But a lot of times, those are the students that are able to get a high school diploma, the white students, and then come back for help because they actually didn't get the services they needed. So they're really different trajectories depending on race. So that's where race comes into it. But the fact that a large portion of school funding has to do with the local taxes and things like that. Of course, if you live in a rich neighborhood and you live in a poor neighborhood, your schools are going to be funded differently. And so that always is going to lead to a disparity.
It's interesting what you're talking about when it comes to discipline in school and the spider trails of impact that has. Is it also that it impacts their very attachment to education and the systemic education, like being schooled in the system? Is there a mistrust that gets built up there?
Yeah, I'd say for a lot of the students, and that's across the board, especially if they grew up without resources, they grew up poor. We're not a family that goes to college. That's for other people. We're a family that works, or we're a family that has other values. And so the value of education a lot of times it's not the same, like for the family that I grew up in and the family that our students grew up in. And so there are other priorities in people's lives other than education. And a lot of times, a distrust of the system that's failed them.
I want to get into the ESOL program in a moment, but coming back to you, Amanda, so when you're dealing with a clientele, people that you're serving who are, at least in some cases, mistrustful of a traditional education. It hasn't served them as well. How are the people you serve coming to you, and how do your tutors circumvent that mistrust that has been built up?
I think that a lot of our students describe their experience being extremely unique and getting the kind of support that they've never experienced. Our program directors train the volunteers to know all of the technical skills they need in order to be a tutor, and there's so much support that they receive throughout their time as a tutor as well. I was talking to one student last week, and she made the point that as a child, we need people to hold our hands and walk us through the challenges of life. And as an immigrant to our community, she said that even as an adult, she needs someone to hold her hand. And that's what her tutor does for her. She helps her navigate some of the challenges that she faces out in the world in our community. And she has that person that's really a mentor and believes in her.
You came from Big Brothers, Big Sisters, and we were talking about this before we started rolling tape. Do you think there's a commonality there in terms of just mentorship, and that a real relationship is built, whereas maybe in school, traditional schools, as kids were coming up, they didn't feel that those relationships were built for them? Is that a component of this?
Absolutely. I think that all of our tutors serve in the role as a mentor as well. And it's such a beautiful opportunity to exchange ideas and cultures and learn more about other countries and other communities.
Erin, you lead the English as a Second Language program. You've been with Literacy Together for 19 years. First of all, give us a sense of the larger umbrella of those 19 years. Is the wisdom that goes into tutoring and some of the best practices, have those evolved a lot in the nearly 2 decades you've been with this organization?
Wow, that's a good question. I want to say we've always tried to stay on the cutting edge of best practices in language instruction. Even 2 decades ago, we were doing really well with very interactive lessons, focusing on listening, speaking, reading, and writing, teaching the English that you need to get through your daily life. I think that we've improved tutor training over the years and equipped the volunteers to better use those materials and pull in other things as well as necessary and really personalize the class to be able to meet the students' needs.
So be a little more specific, though. What are you doing now, you and your tutors doing now or paying attention to now that maybe 10, 15 years ago weren't as top of mind?
I would say technology would be the biggest answer to that question. Computer literacy wasn't a large part of the program 20 years ago, but of course we've seen it's more necessary now. So the need for those skills have grown. So more and more tutors are incorporating computer literacy and or teaching the classes online, so the students are learning to use their computers better and use technology better just by virtue of the way they're taking their class.
Yeah. Now, looking at the Literacy Together website, it seems like that the ESOL program serves more people than any of your other programs. I saw on there about 250 people per year. How are people coming into the ESO? Are they referred by other support agencies that are helping them get acclimated?
Sometimes. Most of it is word of mouth through family or friends that have received our services. People come and find out about us. But services like some people go to Pisgah Legal Services or Catholic Charities to get help with their citizenship applications, maybe. And so they refer people to us. So there's some referral, but most of it is just word of mouth in the community. We don't do any recruiting whatsoever for students in this program because we have a long waiting list, and we always have.
And I imagine some of the challenges are not what Rebecca and Amanda were talking about when just talking about some of the inequities, or talk about where there's overlap or where some of the distinct challenges are with this base of people you serve.
We serve people with all levels of literacy in their native language. So I have folks with PhDs who are learning English for the first time. I have folks that have never been to school. So we have some students who have not had a lifetime of book learning and school learning and that kind of formal education. Some have studied other languages before and others have never studied another language. So all those things play into how easy it is to learn a new language.
How long do your students stay in your programs? Is there a time limit for all programs or no?
In ESOL, we ask tutors and students to commit to stay together for a minimum of 1 year. And that has to do with our federal funding and reporting, so we can pre-test and post-test and show progress within the year, because that's required for that federal funding. And really, any funders want to see measures of student progress. So in ESOL, we ask for that 1-year commitment. Many tutors and students stay for much longer than a year. Certainly, it takes longer than a year to become fluent, and many tutors and students just really enjoy it and find it so rewarding that they stick together for a very long time. Other times the student has to quit, but the volunteer wants to stay with us, so they'll get a new student and they'll have a series of students over many years.
Some of it is one-on-one tutoring, some of it is group tutoring, correct?
We do some group tutoring in ESOL, but the vast majority is one-on-one.
The one program area we aren't talking about right now, because the director isn't here, is the youth element. Amanda, maybe you can speak to that a little bit. What is unique about your youth program? I would think, again, on the surface, students are in school. We've talked a little bit about the inequities that happen from school to school, maybe even from classroom to classroom. But what do your tutors do that isn't necessarily happening in the schools? When you have a fifth grader, fourth grader who's learning to read, supposedly, do you have to coordinate with the schools so that your teaching methods align, that they're reading the same material? Talk about that a little bit.
We use the Orton-Gillingham model for our youth literacy program, and we focus our efforts at a few different after-school sites. We partner with Youth Transform for Life, YTL, the Avery Center, and also West Buncombe Elementary. So we really center in the after-school programs that serve primarily youth of color. And it's the same type of model with the one-on-one tutoring support that the students receive in that program. Traditionally, we've served K through 5, but we've actually moved into the middle school programming as well, along with serving high school youth who are homeless.
Yeah, I just was going to ask you about that. I saw that it's a relatively new program, right, that you're working with high school age homeless kids. Talk about how that need developed and how you're working with kids who are homeless. Are they in school, or who are these kids who are in that particular part of the program?
So it's just getting started. I've just started working with a really great organization called HARC, which stands for Helping At-Risk Kids. I won't go into all the logistics of it, but basically there's a federal program called McKinney-Vento that makes sure that there's funding for students that are experiencing homelessness. And through a bunch of different organizations came together, literacy together to do the education, Homeward Bound to help with housing, On Track to help with financial stuff, Working Wheels to provide transportation or repairs, and I might be forgetting somebody, but a whole bunch of different wraparound support services for the students and their families if they have one with them.
That seems to be almost an ideal of how the model should work, right?
That's exactly right. That's how everything should work.
You alluded to a little bit ago, Erin, about how the federal funding for ESOL. Where is the funding for all your programs coming from? Because I assume the people you serve are not paying out of pocket for these, right?
It's free.
So talk about, from the various programs, how you're stitching together funding.
Yeah, our tutoring services are completely free for everyone who receives them. And to do that, we receive some amount of federal funding. We apply for foundations and grants. We have a very generous donor base as well that fuels our mission of providing these services. And then we have our annual Authors for Literacy event as well.
More after this. When you go to an Asheville City Soccer Club game, you're not just watching soccer, you're welcomed into what players and fans call the South Slope Blues.
The South Slope Blues, they're amazing.
This is the coach of the women's team, Brooke Bingham.
The atmosphere is what makes Asheville City Soccer so great.
Longtime player Laura Greb.
We have the most dedicated fans. We have our South Slope Blues. They post up in the corner of the field every game. They've got their drums, they've got their smoke, they've got their loud voices. You can hear them for miles.
Elite men and women players from throughout North Carolina team up in Asheville for a 2-month season against other aspiring pros from all over the Southeast. Home games this season begin May 18th at Greenwood Field on the UNC Asheville campus. For details, tickets, and your first steps into the South Slope Blues, visit Asheville City Soccer Club at ashevillecitysc.com. So I noticed, again, on the website, it was 250 students in your ESOL program, about 50 students a year served in the adult program. Erin, you said there's a long waiting list for ESOL. Is there a long waiting list in all your programs? You're shaking your head no, Rebecca.
Whenever it comes to my program, the answer is it's complicated.
Please unravel that complication for me. Yeah.
The turnover rate in adult education programs across the country is traditionally pretty high. It's also very high in ours because so many of our students come in survival mode. Like in the past 24 hours, there are 2 students I have that are homeless and trying to figure that out right now. When they're dealing with that and they're dealing with losing somebody else is out last week because she didn't have childcare anymore, lack of transportation. So there's so many issues, not even to mention the people that come that just got out of prison within the past year or so that have been addicts. And a lot of our students suffer from some sort of anxiety or bipolar or whatever. They just tell me these things when I meet them. And so because of all those issues together, and it's unending, the turnover rate is very high. So that means, related to the tutor-student ratio, a lot of times we'll put together pairs of a tutor and a student. The student leaves, and then the tutor has to get another student. They might have to wait for one, and so that's this constant juggling.
What's really surprising to me about this, maybe not surprising because I know about all those factors go into it, but your tutors and you yourself, the program directors, have to juggle so much more than actually just teaching somebody to read.
It's great when we can just talk about that.
Yeah.
But half the job, or more than half the job, is other stuff.
So how do you do that work? Your tutors are trained and to teach people to read. So talk about those elements of the work that you do with these clients in particular. Are these wraparound services continually at play here? They're not.
We have to get them to them. Some people come with caseworkers, case managers, or whatever that are helping them with that stuff. Some people come with nothing at all. And so there's a database that we use, which is free to nonprofits. It's wonderful. And I can enter student information, ask the student what resources they need, and they will get a call from a specific organization with a specific resource. So there's a way we can try to match those things. But some things are impossible. Like you can't make someone not be traumatized from prison. You can't make someone just get housing right away in Asheville. We can try to connect them to resources, but there's just a lot that the students in the program don't have and need and can't get.
The ESOL program is a little different. In ESOL, folks also have issues and barriers to success, barriers to accessing education like childcare and transportation being the big ones. But somehow in the ESOL program, the retention is a little bit higher. Maybe people don't come to me until they've got everything else worked out a little better, or there's more family support in the immigrant community.
That's a huge one, the community support. The communities are just stronger with the students that you serve.
I think that might be a big part of it.
There is a great amount of stigma associated with being a native English speaker and having a hard time with literacy.
Yes, that's the other.
So in fact, some of our students have family members that might not know that's something that they have as a challenge. And like they're talking about, the support can often be lacking in that community.
The one thing we haven't talked about yet is where your tutors come from. So who are your tutors, and what kind of training goes into being a tutor for Literacy Together?
I can start with ESOL. A lot of my tutors are retired folks. A lot of them have recently moved to Asheville and find us when they're just starting to cast about for ways to get involved in the community. A lot of ESOL tutors in particular have traveled the world and maybe speak other languages or have tried to study other languages and kind of get it, how hard it is. But they enjoy that intercultural exchange and have some experience with that. Some of my tutors come from immigrant families, even first, second generation, and they say, somebody helped my parents succeed, or somebody helped me succeed, and so I want to give back.
Does that help when they have a cultural simpatico there? Does that make a difference?
I think it can help. Yeah, I think it depends on the situation, how needed that is, but I think it's always the better you can relate to your tutor or your student, the easier that intimacy and that bond is going to come.
Yeah. So getting back to who your tutors are and what they train in. So it's one thing to know how to read. It's another thing to know how to teach people how to read. How do you do that?
Same with speaking languages, and then I'll pass it over to Rebecca. But in ESOL, just because you can speak English doesn't mean you can teach it, right? But I have a training that all of my volunteers go through that's about 6 to 8 hours, depending on the situation. If they're going to teach online, they get a little bit more training in specifically how to do that. If they're going to teach in person, it focuses more on the best practices of teaching in general and the curriculum that we use, a little bit about the culture of the students, of course, and the system that we find ourselves in, the mandated federal testing that we have to use and the levels and so forth. But it's a training that all tutors take, and then once they're done with that, they can be matched with a student, and then they have me and my associate as support for their entire tenure with us.
And we have volunteers in our ESOL program from all over the world. One thing that's unique about that program, too, is that some of the pairs get together virtually for their sessions. There's one in Nigeria, there's people all over the country.
I always thought COVID started the remote learning thing, but I know that in some fields, remote learning's been going on for a long time. Did that fundamentally change how your tutoring happens? Was any tutoring for Literacy Together, was any tutoring happening online pre-pandemic?
No, the pandemic started it for us. We had to immediately pivot in March and April and May of 2020. I taught all of my volunteers and all of my students how to have their classes online. I tend to think that the one-on-one in-person is the most effective model. But for the students that have the big barriers of transportation and childcare, the online option is a salvation for them. Lots of people couldn't do this if we didn't offer it online. So it's great that now we can offer both models and people can choose what works best for them.
I would imagine that in schools, that for young people in particular, that any time off screen is better than on, because they have so much screen time in their lives anyway.
Yeah, I think that it can be so hard for our young people, especially in our after-school programs. They've been at school all day, and they're tired when it comes to the end of the day. So having a volunteer who can be there, make it personal, create an individual lesson plan, and make it fun with games and activities and getting up to move around when it's necessary. Those are the kinds of things that are hard to accomplish just over a screen.
One of the things I touched on, and I didn't follow up, when you mentioned, there was a woman's name you brought up who's the method of teaching that you...
Oh, Orton Gillingham model. Orton
Gillingham. I don't know Orton Gillingham. I remember there was a podcast series a few years ago that it was an awakening to me. I hadn't heard about this controversy about a method of learning.
Is the whole language versus phonics-based learning?
Yes. And I'm wondering, do you come across any of these differences? Are any schools or districts around here teaching differently, that doing the image-based learning? What was that?
Whole language. Throw it on people and hope it sticks.
Yeah.
That's a dismissive way to say that. That's not exactly right. But
whole language. It was where if you don't know the word, we're going to show you. If it's a picture book, if you see it enough times, or if it's a picture book, what do you guess the word is supposed to be? And there was a whole podcast series about this, blanking on the name.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, that movie, too, that documentary, The Right to Read, is a really good explanation of that.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, you were in the organization before this news really broke out about how this is not the right way to learn to read. Were you already teaching in this method, and have you had to work with schools, or has that been a delicate dance of how the Orton Gillingham way is maybe different or not perfectly overlapping with how other schools teach?
So there's sort of like three different things going on. So her program teaches totally different than the way my program teaches, which is somewhat different than how youth literacy teaches. And so that in adult literacy, if someone doesn't know how to read and very likely has an undiagnosed learning disability, they need phonics-based instruction to make that work. So here's the letter, here's the sound, here's how you put them together. If someone is dyslexic, that is pretty much the only way they're going to learn how to read. But it's totally different. Like best practices in her program are completely different. So she can't. Program. Yeah, you would go insane if you had to teach phonics. It wouldn't make any sense.
Yeah,
so her program is different.
We have phonics as a piece of our curriculum at times for certain students at certain levels.
Yeah,
but we have a completely different approach. Yeah. Namely, we're teaching listening, speaking, reading, and writing all together. It's not just about reading. In fact, it's more about listening and speaking, because that's the way we communicate most.
Okay. So what are your challenges as an organization? It seems like you've been doing this a long time. You've got 3 very distinct programs. You've got case histories. You know who your students are and what their challenges are. You may not be able to meet all their challenges. You're not trying to meet all their challenges, but you understand where they're coming from. What does your organization need? Where are your challenges in terms of the work you're trying to do day to day?
We need more people in the community to care about the work that we're doing and to care about the challenges that we have in Buncombe County regarding literacy. Why
does the community support from afar, aside from people who donate? Every nonprofit needs donations and people support the organization that way. But in a broader level, why is community understanding and support vital to the work you're doing?
It's essential in reducing the stigma that a lot of adults in our community face in reaching their literacy goals. And I also believe that if more people knew about the challenges that we would have a better community that's stronger, healthier, safer. And I think the first step is to care. And people can do that in a lot of different ways. They can give up their voice and share information that they learn about literacy together and the work that we're doing. People can give up their time and volunteer across any of our programs. Or like you said, people can donate and give those resources that are essential to helping people achieve their dreams and goals.
Most nonprofits fight for funding and struggle. Is funding an issue now? And if it is it more so now or differently so than it was years ago?
Yeah, funding is a challenge. It costs more to live in Asheville and Buncombe County now than it ever has before. And so the need to increase funding and build that kind of support is as great as it's ever been, especially when we have the need of students. We have almost 80 students in our ESOL waitlist right now waiting for a tutor. So yeah, the need for funding, the need for support, the need for awareness is essential.
One thing I didn't ask you is about what material you use to teach reading. I know particularly in conservative-led states, books are being pulled from libraries, school libraries, and I'm wondering, do you worry about that? Or are you dealing with culturally sensitive material in any way, or material that might strike a legislature as being, we don't want this, this might make students uncomfortable? That seems to be a buzzword now in terms of the rationale for why books are pulled. Can you speak to young people who come into your program, what they're reading?
Yeah, so we get a lot of donations from different organizations, including some really wonderful culturally sensitive books that represent communities of color and voices that haven't typically been represented in books in the past. And so we're fortunate to have a lot of donations for those types of books. But at our after-school programs, the activities are really phonics-based instructions and games. There's less reading books that happens at the after-school sites, and it's more activities. We should talk about our fourth program. But we partner with Buncombe Partnership for Children for Dolly Parton's Imagination Library.
I saw that. So the Dolly Parton's Imagination Library, this is a nationwide program, right?
It is, yeah.
So is this go specifically for tutoring organizations such as yours, or is it also in schools? How is that implemented locally?
It's specific to the community. What we do is we partner with the Partnership for Children to make this possible. And what our hand is in this is basically helping families sign up for the program. If they sign up, then their child is mailed a free book every single month from the time they're born until the time they turn 5. So this is a great way to instill that love of reading and learning at a young age and get books in the hands of kids who might not otherwise have them.
And was that age group from pre-5, was that a donut hole in terms of literacy that up until programs such as this just largely wasn't being paid attention to?
Yeah. Because we don't have universal preschool in this country yet. I'll optimistically say yet. So, yeah, the kids are entering kindergarten not prepared to learn how to read because they haven't had that at home.
This may sound almost like predictably true, and tell me if this is not necessarily the case. But those kind of building blocks to appreciate reading, even at that age, at 3 years old, 4 years old, how critical is that to the success of making someone literate in early elementary school, in middle school, high school, and keeping up that appreciation, even through some of the challenges that you were talking about, Rebecca? As life challenges come in, you've got those foundational blocks already there. Is that critical even at 3, 4 years old?
Yes. And that's why Dolly started the program. I don't have the stats off the top of my head about how many hundreds of thousands of millions of words a kindergartner doesn't hear if they don't have any reading in their first 5 years, but
I can't remember either, but
it's critical.
Yeah, a child reading at a young age impacts their life forever. And a mother's reading skill is the greatest determinant of her child's future academic success. It even outweighs other factors like neighborhood and family income of where somebody's coming from.
A mother's reading skill is the greatest determiner of a child's success. That's interesting. Is it just because they can sit with them at any time, and that is the person in the family who tends to be the one who sits with their kids and reads?
I think so. Yeah, we get that stat from pro-literacy. But yeah, I think the idea is that if you have a parent who's reading to their child, that is going to impact the kind of education that your child eventually has, which is why it's so important.
Yeah. Anything else that we haven't talked about or anything that we need to let people know about?
I'd like to say maybe one more thing.
Yeah, please.
People find us for so many different reasons. Sometimes our students want to be able to find a better paying job. Sometimes they want to be able to support their kids in school. And then sometimes they want to feel more connected to the community. There's one person from Argentina who was telling me that when she was learning English, her big goal was that she wanted to learn how to be able to tell a joke in English. Because in her home country and in her community, everybody knows she's hilarious and she's funny, but she wanted people here in this community to know that she's funny. And I love that. And that just goes to show how unique and how different all of the students are in our programs.
Did you ever get to hear her be funny?
She's hilarious. She is hilarious. Yes.
I want to thank my guests today, Amanda Wróblewski, Rebecca Massey, and Aaron Sebelius of the nonprofit Literacy Together. Our conversation happened at the BB Theater in downtown Asheville, which comes to me courtesy of the Asheville Contemporary Dance Theater and Susan and Giles Collard. If you value the Overlook's place in Asheville's media landscape, please consider joining dozens of others who are supporting the show through my Patreon crowdfunding page. Become a member for as little as $5 a month. Visit patreon.com/The Overlook Podcast. Our First Look newsletter gives you just a handful of daily headlines from around the local media landscape to get you on your morning. We also have a weekly newsletter devoted to all things The Overlook that hits you every Friday. Both are free and available at podavl.com/newsletter. The theme song for The Overlook, Maker's Song, comes to us courtesy of the Asheville duo The Resonant Rogues. The Overlook is a production of Podcast Asheville. New episodes come out every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on any social media channel at AVL Overlook. And I'll see you on the next episode of The Overlook with Matt Peiken.